G'day guys, Tom from Purpose Built Moto. Something a little bit different for you this time around. We've got a CX500 Cafe Racer that we've just wrapped up. This thing was a half of a build for us, but it was also a lot of repair work too, coming from another shop. So I'm going to take you through what was done to it and then what we had to do to it to repair it to make sure it was ready for the road for this rider to enjoy. It's pretty obvious from first look that this thing is pretty heavily modified. And what I will say about it, that the fabrication work done to it was pretty impeccable. I couldn't pick it apart too much. So from a stock CX500, what's been done is a GSXR fork conversion. Got a Cognito Moto top triple clamp. It's had some custom lighting brackets made, clip-ons fitted, push button controls, and a domino throttle. Well, a really cool bit of fabrication on this thing was the Moto Gadget Speedo that's been Frenched into the tank. Up front, you got a nice custom front fender, a custom exhaust with an SC Project muffler. I'm not a big fan of those. They're a little bit too loud and obnoxious, but there you go. We've fitted a set of Mikuni round slide carbs to it. DNA filters as standard with us. The subframe is quite a nice, tidy little bit of gear. The rear end monoshock conversion was something I had to work quite a bit on to get it to work right. And then obviously the Cognito hubs as well with the spoked wheel conversion. That's pretty much the sort of bones of this project. I'll take you through now what we had to go through and fix up on it. I guess this is just a bit of a lesson in making sure that the guy you choose to build your bike is gonna be doing the right job for you. So the customer's three major complaints on this bike when he got it back were, it didn't feel right to ride, which we put down to a poorly built seat, the rear set's not being set up properly, and the front end conversion was not done right, which I'll run you through. The electronics had a bunch of issues with it, it never really worked right, and the engine didn't run properly. So the first thing we went through was getting the electric sorted enough to a point where we could run the motor and figure out what was going on with it. The engine checked out fine. We brought the problem down to a badly wired ignition, and the CV carbs had a set of velocity stacks fitted to them. CV carbs aren't impossible to run with pod filters or velocity stacks. They're just hard to get them right. So in order to save us a bit of time and make sure the job was done right, a new set of Mikuni mechanical round slide carbs are fitted, DNA filters tuned to suit the bike, and the ignition was wired backwards, which was delivering a pretty weak spark to the right-hand cylinder, so that was figured out. The next thing came down to making sure this thing was rideable. So there was a few issues with that. And as soon as I started pushing the thing around, I noticed it. So on the this sort of setup of the bike, the first thing we tackled was the front end. The front end swap was done poorly. It wasn't spaced correctly, and the bearings were flogged out that were used. So we pulled that apart. New bearings went in, and we spaced the head stem properly so it wasn't binding on the bottom of the neck. That fixed up the steering issue. The bars had to be lifted a little bit, and the seat and tail section was pretty much completely rebuilt. So it had a really sort of cool looking, wasn't my style, it was pretty cool looking tail done on it. But the way that it was set up just made the seat almost impossible to make comfortable. So we rebuilt it from scratch. I did a fiberglass tail cowl for this thing, built a seat pan that Jamison trimmed out for us, and made this sort of undertail tail light setup with our Orbit brake light builder's kit. A really cool piece on the build. It's like a real standout, and I think just with the overall style it works better with what was there before. So the final thing on making this thing look right was moving the tail tidy. It had a tail tidy tucked up, number plate was facing the sky, so we built a swing arm mounted tail tidy. A lot of this stuff that I'm running you through is actually listed on the website for our builder's kit and how to build a swing arm mounted tail tidy. So if you're interested in jumping in and doing that yourself, take a read through our website articles. The rear sets we had to muck around with. The rear brake was a pretty easy fix. The pin linked up to the master cylinder here just wasn't set up right. Quick fix on that one, new switch, and the brake lights are firing fine. On the shifter side, the CX500s are pretty tough. So I'll give you a close-up angle on what we had to actually do there, and then I'll refer you to an article that we've written. If you're building a CX500, you need to know how to do this mod. So when you're fitting rear sets to a CX500, trickiest part is making the forward and back motion of your rear set setup transfer to the up and down motion of the CX500 gearbox. You've got to do that by way of a linkage. So by triangulating this pivot point here, it gives your forward and back force, up and down force. So that's the way we do it. We build a little bracket off the frame here. It's big enough that you can get the engine in and out still. It's not a problem. You got a small cup you got to make on a lathe with a few other bits and pieces, and sort of from time to time when we've done these, we make this a little bit of a detail piece on the bike, so style it how you want. But yeah, this was one thing that we sort of figured out on our first CX500 build. There's actually a YouTuber that has nicked the idea and done a video on this mod before. I can't remember his name, but he did give us a shout out, so thanks to him for that. But yeah, that's the mod that we had to do to make sure this thing would shift into gear, because you couldn't get it out of first when it arrived here. Also, another weird little thing that we had was the oil temperature gauge that was fitted just didn't touch the oil, so it never worked. I don't know what it was doing there, so we replaced that just with a throw-in part. Next thing we had to figure out was the electrics, which is a nightmare when anyone else has wired a bike, because you have no idea how they've gone about it. But I'll take you through exactly what we found that was fucked up and how we fixed it. So in no particular order, I'll just run you through front to back on the bike and what we had to fix up on this thing. The headlight that came fitted on it was like a sort of a knockoff design of our PBM Flashpoint. So the headlight was replaced, the dodgy wiring behind it fixed up with a set of our hollow tip LED turn signals. In the switches, we found a couple of broken wires that were making the indicators not work, and this button here, instead of controlling what should have been a kill switch, I always like to have a kill switch on the bars in case of panic. That was just controlling the Moto Gadget Speedo that's mounted in the tank. So I've moved the Moto Gadget Speedo button to underneath the seat because it's not really something that needs to be readily accessible. Wired in a proper kill switch on it, so you don't have to, in order to turn off your bike, pull the key fob out of your pocket under the seat. You can just hit the button, the bike will die. The ignition, we found the pickups were rewired incorrectly, so it was delivering a weak spark like I mentioned before. So that wiring was pulled out, replaced, and sorted out with a new set of Dynatec coils. When we got underneath the tank and seat, it functioned to a point, but it was all quite messy and just a bit like the terminations weren't done correctly. So we'd already seen a couple of broken wires, so your check engine light, like your oil light, wouldn't come on, and there was no neutral light because it was broken off underneath the tank. So that was replaced and fixed up, and then we had to go through the M unit under the seat and figure out all the connections. Those M units, you have to leave quite a bit of depth with them because they've got the terminals that come in over the top. So there wasn't enough room in the initial seat section to have that sort of setup. So the wires just got squashed, broken, which caused a nightmare because by the time we got it, the wires were just everywhere, nothing was marked. So it was a matter of testing through that end to end. Moving towards the back, we've replaced some of the brake switches and stuff like that, just to make sure that these lights are all functioning on the tail end, and then just fitting up those set of lights, the cool bit of fabrication we did on the Orbit tail light, and it was ready to roll. I think after that, the idea of the bike came alive a bit more, because what good is a bike that looks this good but doesn't really go anywhere? So I'm happy now that we get to push this thing out onto the street and the dude will actually be able to enjoy it like he should have been doing. By the time we drew to a close on this project, with all the styling work and repairs that we'd done, I'd wanted to make sure that it looked the part as well. So I sent it out for a coat in this gnarly bronze, with a bit of black detailing on it, just to finish the job off properly. Jamison's matched it in nicely here with some matte black leather and perforated detail pieces. Now that it's done, I really hope this guy gets what he wanted out of this project and has hours and hours of fun on it.